Well, a big highball and hello to all the model railroaders and rail fans out there, and welcome to August 2024's edition of the Central Division. Hey, I hope everyone's doing well. I'll tell you what, it's been a busy summer for me, but I've actually found time to work on the layout. I did get a little bit of downtime, so we're going to get started, and I'm going to show you what I've done. So I've completed the first building of what will eventually be a two-building complex for the Fort Smith Biscuit Company. Now, for those that have been to my channel before, watched some of my past videos, you may remember I already had a building that I was using for the Fort Smith Biscuit Company. And that one was based on a very old drawing that was done around the early part of the 20th century. I'm not even sure how accurate it was. It looked like something maybe it was done for a newspaper. And it just showed the one building. And later, I came across a postcard somebody had on eBay. It was from the 1950s era, and it was an artist's rendition, color rendition of what the entire complex looked like, including the second building. So I know the second building was in place at least by the 1950s. So even though the 1950s is still, 20 years or give or take a little bit from the era that I modeled, the 1970s, it's going to be, the complex from that 50s image is going to be a lot closer to what the complex looked like in the 1970s. So I said, I'm going to go with this. It's closer to what the actual complex would have looked like during my era. Retired the original Fort Smith Biscuit Company, hoping to find another place in the layout that I can use that. So the second building I'm going to put here. And like the first building, I'm going to go with the Woodland Scenics modular building kit system. Very inexpensive, easy system to put together. Now the original complex had a skywalk going between building 1 and building 2. So I'm going to scratch build the skywalk, and then there was a public street with sidewalks that ran down the middle between the two buildings here underneath the skywalk. I think that was 5th Street in Fort Smith, but I'm going to have to check on that. So probably here in the next month or so, I'm going to get started on the second building, and hopefully before the year's out is have this entire area done. So by the 1970s, you had more commodities like sugar and flour being carried by Airslide hoppers. Boxcars were not out of the picture just yet, but again, you saw less loads coming in using a boxcar. So again, I have no images or information of the Fort Smith Biscuit Company complex in the 70s era. So kind of using modeler's license, I thought, they would have probably had at least some of the deliveries of flour and sugar coming in with Airslide hoppers. So with that, what I did is added an unloading system for the Airslides. Now, if you're not familiar how Airslide hoppers work, I'm going to give you the very basic Joe Musgrove's explanation of how a Airslide hopper works. And again, if anyone with additional information, out there, a little bit more detailed, feel free to post it in the comment section there. But in basic terms, an Airslide hopper it's a two-pipe system. And inside the Airslide hopper, they have a special fabric that allows air to flow through the fabric, and it liquefies the commodity it's carrying, say like sugar or flour. And this is basically removed or sucked out from the hopper into a holding tank. Again, very, very simple way of explaining how all this works. So if you can imagine, a hopper would pull in here, and you'd have a two-pipe system. So here, I've got the nozzles for compressed air, and I've got stainless steel pipes that actually will carry the flour from the hopper to the holding tanks. And so the hopper would come in to the facility similar to this. One hose would be hooked up to the high pressure, would be hooked up to a valve on the hopper car. That was for air to be pumped into the hopper. And then another hose would be connected to the outflowing valve on the hopper, connected to like a pipe system. And that's how the flour or sugar or whatever commodity it might be using would get from the car to the holding tank. So that's basically how it works here. Now, again, you had more and more of these commodities by the 70s really being carried by Airslides, like the sugar and flour and such. But boxcars were not totally out of the picture, and you had some older facilities that weren't able to take loads from an Airslide hopper. They didn't have the system in place. So with that in mind, and from the images in the 1950s, I did leave a couple of freight doors here. So this would allow commodities coming in, say like bagged flour, for example, or maybe something else the facility would need, it would be able to take in boxcar loads. Okay, so not only have I been building things during the summer, I've actually been tearing them out. I'm going to show you two areas. One is a have-to, this area, and then the second area was just changing an industry. Now, I tell you, for me, it's kind of my mentality is, you know, when something is in and it's done and it looks good, especially I've got so much more to do in the layout and kits to build and stuff, just the idea of just having to tear something up and redo it just, goes against my grain. I hate doing it. It's work I just don't want to do. So this is kind of a have-to situation. So basically what was going on is I had a turnout here and it split the track where the main line continued going this way, and this main line allows for trains to bypass the yard. And then it branched off here on a spur that served Bell's Best dog food. So pan the camera back over here to the left. Try not to shake it too bad there. So basically what was happening is there's a height difference. So trains going this way had a little bit of a climb, not much. They would hit the original turnout here, and say when one car passed the turnout and back onto track, for lack of a better description, there was like an abrupt bump or change in height, because you know that those turnouts are stiff. You know, they're not going to bend. So what was happening is if the coupler levels were not perfect, and it happened even if they were perfect, or especially a longer car, a car would become uncoupled at that point and roll back. Usually that didn't happen when I was operating trains by myself. You know, it's how it goes always when you have somebody over is when this happens. So it's like, okay, so I've got to get this fixed. So what I've done is I've torn out the turnout and I've moved the replacement back. Now, the last few turnouts I put in, I used to go with micro engineering turnouts. Unfortunately, had some issues with those. Those had to go back to the company for repair. Now, that was before the sell-offs. I'm hoping the product's gotten better since then. But anyway, I have gone with the Pico switches, and I tell you, great products. They work flawlessly, they look good. So I've been going with Pico the last few turnout installs that I've done. So anyway, so what's going to happen here, and obviously I've got to fill this in with, you know, foam and things, make all this nice and even, is the turnout's been moved back. So the level of the turnout will be equal with this. So this will be flat. Then there'll be the two sections of track here, about probably half a car length will remain at the same level. Then after that point is where you'll have a nice, long, smooth transition down to the lower level here. So that way the transition doesn't happen at the end of a turnout, because you know turnouts are they're stiff, they don't give. So there's not any way of doing any type of a height adjustment, you know, along the route of the turnout. You can, it's just very difficult. So I think this is going to fix the problem. And again, I'm gonna try to get this done as soon as I can, because obviously it affects running trains. But again, don't like to do it, but it's like anything, you know, eventually that problem's gonna bug you so much, you just gotta get it fixed. So for my subscribers and anyone who's visited my channel before and seen the past layout update videos and the operational videos, you may or may not recognize this area. This is where the original Fort Smith Biscuit Company complex was. And I modeled that one using an HO scale Atlas warehouse kit. And I believe the structure was based off a warehouse up in New Jersey. So from the earlier part of the video, you know, it's like a new Biscuit company building, different part of the layout. So it's like, well, okay, so what do I want to do this? What do I want to do with this area? So at first I was like, well, keep the building in place, rename it, make it into another industry, and just, keep on moving on. It was like, okay, again, it goes against my grain, but hate tearing things out and changing. But okay, now I wanted something different. And kind of three things drove that. The first was the original complex here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. It was a 4-story building, so the only way that people could switch the layout would be to come over here and go out this lift up section. This is actually hinged on this area here. And we'll zoom out just a little bit. And this is normally the way you go in and out of the room. So anyway, they would come out of this area here, come around, and they would do the switching and operations that they needed to do, and they'd go back the same way. Again, it's not a duck under, it's not a big deal. You just kind of swing up the gate, but still a little bit of the inconvenience considering all the rest of the operation is on the side of the layout. So the other thing, two things, is one, I wanted an industry that actually had operations outside, not 100% outside, but something, like a scrap yard, maybe a brick yard, something like that. And then finally, having an excuse to switch cars that I currently wasn't switching on the layout. So what I came up with is modeling a steel and metal fabrication company that was served by the Missouri Pacific in Fort Smith back during the 70s era. It's still in business. It's no longer rail served. It's changed names a couple of times. But I thought this would be perfect. And so the plan is, and this is based off of the modern complex that's currently in Fort Smith now, using Google Earth and the visits. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures of anything, the company was back in the 70s. But in any case, I'm going to extend the rail out here, extend the apron here, asphalt apron out to here. I'm going to have some small outer buildings, maybe little one-story office buildings and things like that, and then have racks and different things like that that is currently used for metal beams and steel plating and things like that. Now, interestingly enough, they're not covered. So the only thing I can think of is these must have some type of coating on them because they're not protected from the elements. But in any case, that was like, okay, great. So it's you have two out of the three here. You have being able to switch on the same side, you switch everything else. You're not having to go through the exit. You have an industry that's that has some outdoor operations. And finally, the third thing was like, I have an excuse to switch cars that I'm not normally switching on the layout. So I'm gonna have the covered steel coil cars coming in, as well as the covered gondolas. So I think it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna create kind of an interesting scene. And again, I think the big thing is, it's gonna be a little bit easier for the operators. So keep you updated on how that goes. Okay, so we've got to visit two areas that I've torn up the layout. So we're going to go back to something positive, like where I'm actually building something new here. So panning the camera to the left here and kind of pan it back to the right. So you got to get an idea of the area. So this area I've kind of given some thought for a long time of what I want to do with. So the original idea was to have a spur coming off this turnout in the distance here. You might not be able to see that. It was going to kind of curve around, and then I'll pan the camera back to the left here, and my apologies if it's getting shaky there. That's pretty smooth. So the track's going to curve around, and it's going to have a narrow peninsula here, and the track would come out on the peninsula, and there'd be a couple of industries that would switch. Now, the main reason I was looking at doing that is I'm really, I kind of follow a lot of Lance Minheim's, his layout advice, and one of the things I completely agree on is the importance of having free space or openness where you don't have anything, where it doesn't look like things are crowded. They don't look realistic. So that was my concern about having an industry here. Well, then hard logic hit and also opinion. The first one is talking to friends that come over and run the layout and ran that idea past them. I said, you know, Joe, we really like having the layout room the way it is, where everything is along the walls. You have this big, huge open space where you can walk to different areas, you can run trains, you're not bumping into each other, it doesn't feel crowded. And I agree with that. I don't like that either. I'm sure a lot of us, including me, have operated in layouts where it's like you're afraid to even turn slightly to the left because you might bump into somebody or something. So then the hard logic hit. One was the pricing. Even though a peninsula isn't going to take that much wood is still expensive. And it's like, okay, what kind of return am I going to get on this investment here as far as operations? And then the logic of numbers hit. So when measuring everything out, I realized that I can only have one industry on that extension. The track would not be very long because the curve would eat up a lot of it. And basically, the peninsula can only go out so far before it started causing problems getting other parts of the layout. So couldn't do it. And of course, you know, it's taking actual measurements. I mean, it's critical model railroading, but it's just that hard truth that sometimes it can give you good news, sometimes it can give you bad news. So it didn't make any sense to put in peninsula, so that idea was quashed. So what I decided to do is go ahead and put the industry here. And I've angled the track, 2 tracks in this case, where I don't think once everything is said and done that the scene's going to look crowded at all. I'm going to have some open space. Pan the camera to the left here. You'll still be able to see and get to the Ward Cold Storage Company and be able to see and operate the yard there you see in the distance without any problem. So anyway, so what I've decided to go with is an industry in Fort Smith. It's been around since the 70s, and there's actually some art that was put on a couple of the buildings past the era that I model, so I'm going to have it on mine, that really just sort of made this facility sort of a landmark for Fort Smith, and I'm going to leave it at that. I will say, if you're curious, go out and do a Google search on OK Feed Mills Fort Smith, and you'll see what I mean about those paintings, drawings, those murals on the 2 industries there. So anyway, I'm going to go with OK Feed Mills. Now, technically, OK Feed Mills at that time was switched by the Fort Smith Dodger, which is a Dodger is Kansas City Southern's railroad way of saying, I think it's the equivalent of their turn. It's kind of KCS language. So, and it still is serviced by KCS, but again, that's one of the beauties of having a proto freelance versus a prototype layout is I'm just going to flub history and I'm going to let the Missouri Pacific switch it. Now, eventually, once I find a locomotive that I like, a KCS locomotive from the 70s era, and it would be a white locomotive. And from what I've seen, they use the GP7s, 9s, as well as the GP38-2s. Then I might add that to part of the operating session where you have the Dodger come out, you know, work the feed mill, and I think that would be kind of fun because right now I actually have a Frisco locomotive that comes out of staging and exchanges cars and stuff like it did in Fort Smith. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, that's what I decided to go with. Now I'm going to take you down to my workbench here, and it's still a work in progress, but I'm going to show you what I've done in the OK Feed Mill. Okay, so welcome to the HO scale version of OK Feed Mills, a work in progress that currently resides on my portable workbench I have down in my living room. This is the main area. I put together structures, work on locomotives and cars and things like that. Get to chill with the family, work on the hobby. So kind of it's the best of both worlds here. And I'm going to try to keep my voice here as we go along, but give you a tour of what I've done so far. First, let me say this is a close representation of the complex in Fort Smith. It's not an exact replica. Maybe one day after retirement and I got more time to do some scratch building, may go back and look at doing an exact replica. But I think this is going to do well as sort of a representation of what you have up there now. So the main part of the complex here, the concrete grain elevator, this part of the building is actually a kit bash from a Walters grain elevator kit. Now on their kit, you actually have where two of the walls come up and are kind of shaped here to allow you to build what's called a head house. So the complex in Fort Smith did not have a head house up here. So cut those off, sanded the areas down, and so you'll have the flat roof there like the actual complex. So coming over here to the left, I built an extension using styrene. So this looks very close to what the actual elevator itself looks like up in Fort Smith. It's actually an L-shaped building. Now, the actual structure also has, coming off the main elevator, is a very long corrugated metal building that ties into the main elevator. So my representation of that building is not going to be nearly as long as the actual building here. It's a condensed scene. So the building itself is actually tied in where the edges match up perfectly to the elevator here. So it's like just one continuous wall, then you hit that building, one continuous wall goes back. So what I did is I took a Rick's product, a 2-bay engine stall to build this, and it was a little bit wide. It stood out from either side of the elevator here. So basically what I did is on this wall, I cut down maybe about a 1/2 inch, kind of going from memory on each side. In that way, it kind of narrowed up everything where it was just, perfect, just a smooth transition from where the concrete wall ends here and where these two walls began in the building. Now, I'm not sure what they actually do in this building. I couldn't get that information. It's very hard to get that type of information. Everyone is so worried about security and everything now. A guess would be this is a feed mill, so maybe where feed is bagged or maybe outgoing bagged feed is stored. I don't really know. Now, everything that's outgoing is by truck. The only thing that comes in is the hoppers, and I'm assuming would be delivering grain or soybeans or something of that nature. It's again another information I wasn't able to find there. So on the concrete elevator itself, I tell you, sometimes these can be a little bit intimidating as far as the coloring and getting them right. And again, first off, let me say a lot of people will try to hammer into your head that the base color concrete, always go with tan, light brown, kind of a tan brown or gray. And in many cases that's correct. But again, going back to what I always say, model from the real world, concrete's not always gray and brown. In the case of the feed mill here, and I've made several visits to the mill, as well as looking at images on Google Earth, it's an off-white color. It's been there for a few decades, and obviously it's stained and weathered. But the base color is by no means a gray or a tan. It is definitely an off-white. So if I'd just gone with the suggestions out there and just went with that gray and tan, it would have been completely wrong. So my formula for putting together a realistic looking grain elevator, in this case, not perfect, but I think it's very, definitely a believable representation. I started out with the base color using a Krylon spray colored or a spray primer, just a flat white, which is kind of an off white color, so not perfect white. So that was my base color. Then I used a color, and it's a gloss color in Tamayo's auto model line, and it's called Pearl. And it's not a solid coat when it goes on. It's almost sort of like a transparent film, almost, I would say, and it gives it sort of an off brown or lightly brown kind of shade. So, and it was perfect. And by the way, did not start out doing any of this on the structure. I took scrap pieces of styrene and for a few days just practice with colors and techniques and things like that. So unless you've done something like this before, I would not suggest starting doing any of this in your main structure to get the look you're going for. Practice on some scrap pieces first, and that's exactly what I did. So anyway, so I had the primer on there, and then I had the Tamiya, the pearl color, which is actually a gloss, but that's okay because there's several coats of dull coat that go on after that. So then after that, went ahead and added some dull coat in, and the next step was putting what's called the slip form lines, and these are formed during the construction of a lot of concrete elevators and things using what's called slip form process. So basically these are real just kind of very light fine lines that are left over after the process here. And I know people have used different techniques to do this. I've seen some people use like washes. I've seen some people use paint. For this, though, I think it would have been, and I see this sometimes in the structures. And again, that's fine. I mean, not trying to knock anything anyone's doing, but it makes the lines look too wide and the weathering a little bit too heavy under the lines. So what I did for my structure is I carefully, using a ruler, marked with a pencil, I marked the little dot where each line would stop and end. And then what I did is using a ruler to guide the application process, I took a pointed cotton swab, and then I used a Bragdon weathering powder called Rail Brown, and just very gently, just using the very tip of that hobby swab, went across, got a little bit more weathering powder on there, and went back this way. So it gives very just subtle lines, gives that look of the slip form lines that you get when these types of structures are put together, but it's not real heavy. You don't have like this several inches of line or runoff coming down here. So for my structure, I think it looks closer to the actual structure. So that's the technique I use. You also see lines going down on that process, and again, it's same thing, just taking that cotton swab, ruler, going up and down here. And they're not always even. They're not always going to be like the center of the building. Sometimes they're going to be off a little bit. You might have one in age. It just depends on how the structure was put together. So I had to slip the lines on there. Then what I did is, using a Tamiya weathering powder called Grimy Gray and a hobby swab, I went across and just randomly went back and forth in different areas here to add that sort of that dark off color look, from weather and grime and things like that it built up over the years. So the final thing that I did here, so back up a little bit, after doing the kind of the lines here using the Grimy Gray, I went ahead and added another shot of dull coat, then went back using Bragdon's weathering powder and just randomly applied a Bragdon weathering color called Weathered Brown all over the model. Then taking not a wet but a damp cloth, very gently wipe down. Like I said, again, everything, gravity, things go down. Flow, weathering goes down. You never want to go side to side. So basically went down, and that left just sort of a hint of that weathering powder on there and spread it out, that Weathered Brown weathering powder. So gave it sort of, again, more of a brownish off-white color, kind of helped with the earlier application of the Tamiya pearl. So anyway, that's the formula that I used for my, putting together this particular structure. And I think it worked out pretty well. I think it looks good. Again, always looking for ways to improve, but again, I'd be interested to know, kind of get your opinion there in the comment section. So other things I've done so far is I've added the window blocks here, and based on the actual structures, this is just looks like it was plywood or something they put up. There's some windows that look like it's looks like an old tarp or something they just quickly put up over the windows. A lot of them are torn in places, and that's what I did here. Basically just taking heavy construction paper and weathering it up a little bit. Now, one of the things that I was kind of like, okay, how am I going to do this, is on the front of the elevator in Fort Smith is they have the OK Feed Mills logo that has the 2 toy soldiers there, and it's quality guarded, flavor sealed, and it looks really cool. It's actually OK Feed Mills was bought out in the late 80s, but the image is still there on the tower. So I thought, wow, man, how am I'm going to do this? So I was lucky. I got out online, thank you, Google, and somebody had posted out there, it was a logo, very clean logo of OK Foods. And I'm guessing it was maybe used for like a news article or something. Again, it was a very clean copy. So I said, okay, I'm going to use that. It's perfect. But I was like thinking, okay, OK Foods is a division of OK Feed, but the actual, the sign on the mill itself, the painting there, is actually OK Feeds, not Foods. So basically, before, and this is just a water slide decal I printed out, I carefully cut out the area here that said Foods, basically made a feeds, the word feeds on my computer in Word, tried to get the color kind of where it needed to be, the size where it needed to be, printed it out, and as a separate water slide decal, put it in there. Of course, with the weathering and things like that, it looks good. So as far as the weathering too, one of the things sometimes I see is like a weathered building and you have this like brand new shiny logo, and at least for my structure here, the logo in the building in Fort Smith is actually pretty weathered. It's sort of the age of the building and the age of their logo matches pretty well. It's also pretty faded in some areas down to the color behind where the paint went. So on that, basically it was just it was a layering process. Starting once the label was in place, I used dull coat to seal it, then went back and just very light layers of like weathered brown, some light off gray weathering powders, and some just very watered down washes of a gray. And again, doing this in steps, I got it to where I wanted it. You never want to try to go heavy because you can never go back. You can always add, but you can never go back. And then finally, shot it with some dull coat and called it finished. So there we go. So the final steps here I'm going to do is I've got to add some details to the building. So I've got on order, I've got some railing that's going to go up in these sections here. Of course, I'm going to have the dust collectors. Eventually, phase 2, what I'm going to do is have a conveyor that's going to come from this area of the building, like the actual structure. It's going to run behind the building, and then I'm just going to have some corrugated grain storage bins behind there that ties into. So again, hoping to have this done in the next couple of weeks and get it on the layout, but I'll keep you up to speed on how things are looking. Well, you see, progress in the layout continues, and maybe a little bit of destruction too, but hey, that's okay. It's all going to come out really well in the end, right? So as I do with every time I do these videos, I do want to thank the subscribers out there. I tell you, you're the ones that keep me motivated, keep me going. So big thank you for subscribing to the channel. And I tell you, gosh, I guess I can say, actually put it in years now, at least a few years. I tell you, it's I've developed some friendships, gotten to know people, especially those that have layouts. And it's just, it still amazes me how YouTube itself has grown and really has become this great community for model railroaders. So good thing. So if you're not a subscriber and you like what you see, I certainly invite you to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any comments or questions or feedback or anything like that, go ahead and put it down in that comment section below. I read those. I always answer the questions. If I don't know something, I'll try to point you in a direction to help you out there. So again, put those in there. Would love to see them. So until next time, and I guess next time will technically be in fall, which I'm looking forward to, especially with the temperatures in Arkansas land. Fall's going to be a good thing, so looking forward to that. So anyway, next update will be here in the fall, so we'll show you what I've done at that point and how much I've progressed. And until then, we'll say goodbye, and as always, highball.